Welcome back to another episode of Your Hope-Filled Perspective, where it's our goal to restore hope, renew minds, and empower listeners to live in their God-given identity. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Bengtson. This week, the scripture verse that encapsulates the theme of this episode is Psalm 30, verse 5. Weeping may stay for the night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. Today, we're going to be talking about how to find joy even in the midst of life's most difficult circumstances. On today's show, we're going to be talking to my friend, Tricia Thirey. Tricia is a mom to three and an educator in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. A former military spouse, she lost her husband to brain cancer after a 4.5-year battle in the summer of 2017. During the last years of his life, she felt the Lord calling her to live a life of joy. And now she makes it her everyday purpose to try to instill that joy into her 8-year-old twins and her 6-year-old daughter. Welcome to the program, Tricia.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I'm so honored to have you here and to share your story. I know that so often our ministries and our passions are birthed out of our own trials and circumstances. You've learned the importance of living a life of joy, regardless of your circumstances. Will you tell us how you came to that place? Were you just always naturally joyful, or what led to it?
I am happy to share that. My husband was diagnosed when our twins were 1 year. They had just had their first birthday. He had returned from Afghanistan and had had a series of seizures that helped us to determine that he had a brain tumor. And in the first year after his diagnosis, we were both very optimistic. We had his treatment went well. It was better than the doctors expected. We were both able to find lots of joy in every moment. When he was re-diagnosed 2 years later and had his second surgery, it was a little harder to find joy in all of those moments. And it was also really hard to trust and believe that things were just going to be okay. And I felt like after his second brain surgery, and we moved to Ohio to be close to family, I felt at that point that God was telling me that, the battle is not over, but it's very important that you make the choice to choose to find the good in everything. And at the time, I didn't know what that good was. And there's still parts of my story that I don't completely understand now. And I don't know that I ever will, but I still believe that God's in control of all of those things. And he led me that last year of Ben's life to really choose to seek joy in everything and to look for the good in every day. So at the end of the day, even if there was only one thing that I could say was good about that day, I wanted to be able to focus on that one good thing and not all the things that went wrong and all the hard moments. Wow. And when he passed away in August of 2017, we went through a really hard, dark period. And I woke up one day and I felt like God was saying to me, like, your story is not over. What I asked you to do at the beginning of this year is the same. And I want you to instill that in your children. And so I wanted them to understand it's okay to grieve. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to have those moments where life is overwhelming. But I also wanted them to know that they have the choice to choose to say that this is not it. This is not everything. It's okay for us to still have joy, and it's okay for us to have laughter, and it's okay for us to still look for the good in things that might not always seem good.
Yeah. Wow. I love that perspective because I have many friends who are now grieving the loss of a spouse. And when we talk, they feel to some degree like if they have a good day, if they smile, if they laugh, that they're betraying their loved one who's no longer with them. But in you saying that, it was really like God was challenging you to still find the joy in life. And God wouldn't call you to do that if it was some way marginalizing Ben's life or your loss of him.
I think that it's hard sometimes too for us as widows or as somebody who's grieving, because if other people see you smiling and having a good time, they think that you've moved on or that you've gotten over it. And it's not something you ever get over, but it's one of those things that if you haven't necessarily grieved, sometimes you don't understand that. And so you feel torn. Like, if I'm smiling and laughing, do people know that I'm still sad? Or, is it okay for me to smile and laugh if I am sad? Because you don't want to betray them. You don't want to betray, like, to make anyone feel like that they weren't enough for you to be able to grieve them. But at the same time, I came to the realization that it was okay to still have those moments. And I really felt like, even in the midst of 4.5 years of brain cancer, Ben found the good in every moment. He was always the one to encourage me. He was always the one smiling, and he was always optimistic. And for me, looking back now, I feel like he prepared me for this, to know, like, this is how we handle hard things. Like, we went through infertility and he wouldn't give up on that. He was like, no, we're going to beat this. Like, this is what God has for us. We're going to see the good. And so I feel like, even looking back now, I'm like, he spent all of the hard things we went through in our marriage with him, helped prepare me for life without him.
Wow. What an amazing tribute. So it really was an impact of his outlook influencing how you're coping today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yes.
That's something that your kiddos can be very proud of their daddy for. That's something that you'll be able to share forever. That dad
There,
always had this great outlook.
he did have a great outlook. And that is the one thing that everyone who came from all across the country for his funeral shared with us. And every year, for his birthday, we sort of have a birthday party for him, and I share stories with them of their dad that other people have given to me so that they can hold on to them, because the twins were 5 and my daughter was 3 when he passed away. So a lot of their memories are the things that they've heard,
Yeah.
and that they cherish because they've seen pictures and because they hear things from other people. But I want them to know his personality. And he was such a lovable guy. There wasn't anybody who disliked him, because he had that great personality where he was optimistic and cheerful and made jokes about everything.
Did that ever in any way complicate your grief? I'm trying to put myself in your shoes, and I'm thinking, to have a spouse that optimistic, was it even harder than the second time when he didn't make it? Because here he had this great attitude. It would be easy to get caught up in, we're going to do this, we're going to make it, everything's going to be great. And that second time, you didn't have the same outcome as the first time.
No, we didn't. And I feel like, even with that, when he was first diagnosed, because of the grade of his brain tumor, they gave us a 1.5 year prognosis for him for length of life with treatment. And we chose to go a different route and do more holistic treatment, because the prognosis was not good for what the treatment was anyways. And it was almost 2.5, no, it was 3 years before his second brain surgery. And the doctors at the time were like, we're not sure how you even made it this far. And he did really well after the second surgery, but it still was difficult. I think his optimism, though, is what gave me hope and trust in a different outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that even in that last year when it was really hard, and God said, Tricia, just trust me and choose to find the good and to enjoy the moments, that we were able to still take some family trips and to do some things to make memories with our kids and to look for good even in the hard. And so even in the grieving afterwards, whereas I know he would have been optimistic, I also know that he would have allowed me to cry, because he let me cry and grieve the loss of other things during our marriage that were really hard to deal with.
So it wasn't that he had just this Pollyanna out,
No,
but he was able to still find the good despite the hard.
yes, absolutely. And he was one of those people who he just had this great outlook. He wouldn't let anything that came, he'd be like, this is not worth being upset about. Let's move on. Like, he didn't ever want to go to bed upset about anything. He would always make me laugh. If I was upset and wanted to argue something out, he would make a joke and goof off, and it would be forgotten. And so it wasn't that he couldn't take things seriously, because he did, and he was a realist. But at the same time, he also knew that you don't sweat the small stuff. Like, and it's all small in the grand scheme of things. Like, there's still good stuff in the midst of all the bad. You just have to stop focusing on the bad.
Did he have a favorite life verse? Because as you describe him, to me, he epitomizes someone who would embrace, count it all joy.
Yeah.
In the hard. So I'm just curious if
He
you had
would
a favorite
actually.
verse.
He would sit if anything wouldn't go the right way, he would laugh and start singing, count your blessings, count them one by one. And so that hung above our kitchen table for a long time. And so if something got canceled that we were really excited about, he'd be like, well, it probably wasn't supposed to happen, so count your blessings. So he probably would have loved that verse. I'd have to look back and see. I know he has a lot of verses marked in his Bible, which I appreciate being able to go through and see. I don't know if he had one that was a life verse, honestly.
Well, I think that had to have been one of them.
It should have been for sure. He lived it. He lived it.
When you look back, now hindsight's 2020. When did God really start showing you to lead a life of joy? Was it before his diagnosis even, or was it really when that hit?
I would say it probably was more with his diagnosis and along that time frame. At the weekend that he had his first seizure and we had found out about the brain tumor, I heard a song by Laura Story, Blessings. Yeah. And I listened to that on repeat for a long time, because it gave me so much comfort to know that even in the midst of storms, there is a plan and God has something bigger than this. And I think that I was able to be encouraged and draw encouragement from him for the first several years. And I think that when it got to that last year and it was harder for me to find that I really felt like God was saying, Tricia, it's your choice. Like, you have to make this choice. And I know it can be a difficult choice, and it has to be something that you let go within you. It can't just be put a smile on your face and pretend you're okay. You have to really look for the good.
How do you feel like God really prepared you for the pain and the loss? Because having a husband with such an optimistic outlook, I would think it would make it harder than when I actually lost him, because I was ready. I was expecting the good. God's going to come through and everything's going to be okay. Did he prepare you for the pain?
I would say yes and no, because the last year was hard and there were a lot of signs that that he was not okay. But at the same time, I was very optimistic and I wasn't ready for it when it happened. And so even afterwards, and people try to be helpful and say, well, you probably saw it coming a little bit. I didn't, because I really did believe that he was going to be okay. I do feel, though, that despite all that optimism, that God prepared my heart and mind. I studied that summer before he died. Proverbs 31 Ministries did a study on the book of Job. And I read through the book of Job and was at the end of Job in August when he passed away. And I remember thinking like it was not at all why I read it. I just read it because that's what they were doing at the time. But I remember leaving the hospital and thinking, wow, God, like this is where I am now. And I know that you can restore what was lost, and it won't necessarily be the same, but you still have a plan in the midst of it.
Mhm. What a precious truth to hold on to. That had to have given you hope to be able to hold on to that truth, even in the most difficult of circumstances.
Yes.
Friends, we're going to take a real short commercial break, but I want you to stick with us because Tricia's going to share more about the pursuit of joy. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your hope-filled perspective. Tricia, what do you think is our greatest stumbling block when pursuing joy or even recognizing joy where it is?
That's a great question. I I think that sometimes it is hard when you make the choice to choose joy to keep choosing joy when things keep going wrong.
Mhm.
And sometimes it comes in the form for me of waves of grief. And it'll be a couple of little things that come along and they feel like really big things. And I have to make a conscious effort to get into scripture and to read and to focus and to remind myself that these are not the biggest things that they could be. And I find myself having to be reflective. One of the things that I did the first year after Ben passed away was I got a gratitude journal. And so at night when I couldn't sleep and was laying in bed thinking about all of the hard and the fact that I was alone and had 3 young children, I would try to find 3 good things. And I would write down 3 good things every day. And I did it every day for at least the first 6 months because I needed to have a purpose and to fall asleep thinking on those things instead of the hard. Because there were nights when it was really hard to sleep knowing that I was alone and knowing that I could look for and find 3 good things about every day and focus on them to fall asleep by made a huge difference in my outlook.
What kinds of things did God bring to your mind to choose to be grateful for? 3 good things.
Some examples of those.
Yeah.
Some days it would be something simple like getting a text or a phone call from a friend in the midst of a long, hard day. Because at the time I was homeschooling, I didn't get out of the house a lot. I had a few people who had brought meals for me after Ben died that I had never met before. And they ended up becoming some of my closest friends because they came and they brought a meal and they were like, hey, can we bring our kids to come play with your kids? And I'm like, yes, please do. And so many of my moments of joy that first year and those things to be grateful for came from those friends who made a point to reach out to someone they didn't know and be the hands and feet of Jesus, exactly what I needed at that time.
Yeah.
Some days it was going outside in the backyard and having like seen that my neighbor mowed. And I had 2 acres at the time, and he would mow his yard and come across mine. And I'm like, thank you, Lord, so much for this blessing, because trying to mow with 3 young kids in the house is not always the easiest thing to do. And it was just looking for the little things. It would be sometimes it was takeout because I didn't like to cook for a while. Just the simple little things that I didn't have to do that felt really hard.
I have friends and family who have become widows or widowers recently, and many other friends who are going through anything but joyful times. What can you share for them about how to how to pursue that, how to seek it, where to find it when the hard days hit?
I feel like that answer to that is different for everybody. I feel like that there are days when I literally have to make a choice and say, hey, I have to choose to be happy and I have to look for the good. My children make that really easy for me because I can't stay in bed if I'm having a hard day. I still have to get up and be mom. My heart hurts for people who don't have something every day that makes it worth getting up and getting out of bed and living life. And especially right now in our country, with everybody being at home and grieving the loss of something, whether it's a person or something else in their life that they're not having right now, being alone is one of those hardest things. And so my advice to people who know somebody who's grieving is to not take no for an answer. If you reach out to that person and they say we're good, find something to do for them anyways, because they probably need it. They will appreciate it. They will appreciate just hearing from you, even if that's all that it is. For me, just having a text or a message at night when I was struggling to sleep. I had a couple of friends that would call or text me, and it would be 11 or 12 at night, which is a time of night I would never call or text somebody, but they knew I would be up, and they wanted to make sure I knew that if I was alone and I was feeling lonely, that I had somebody to talk to.
What a gift.
A wonderful
gift during the hardest hours. And I think there could be a tendency to think, oh, well, I don't want to bother them.
Mm-hmm.
But God knew that you needed it.
Absolutely.
At a time when most people wouldn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's okay to grieve? And can you experience grief and joy simultaneously?
Yes, absolutely. It is absolutely okay to grieve. It is important to grieve. It is very important to grieve. And I think it's important to grieve well. I don't think that you can be happy all the time. I don't think that that's possible. I don't think it's healthy. I think that it's important to acknowledge what you've lost and acknowledge how hard it is to have lost it. But I also think that if you can't ever do more than acknowledge it, it's very hard to find happiness and it's very hard to find joy. And for me, I knew that that was the last thing Ben would have wanted for me. He would not have wanted me to stay in that place. We had a pastor early in our marriage who started every service by saying, it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to want to stay there. And I have clung to that because it's okay for me to have hard days. It's okay for me to struggle. It's okay for me to grieve. And it's okay for everyone to grieve, whatever their loss is. But it's not okay to not want to leave that place and to stay in that place.
You mentioned a phrase that I've heard before, and that is that you wanted to grieve well. Yeah. Unpack that a little bit. What do you mean by that?
I think that it's really hard for some people to really let the tears flow, to feel all the pain. In the fall, I had a Bible study leader tell me that it was important to grieve all the losses, not just the loss of my spouse, but all the secondary losses that came with that. The loss of all the things that came with having a family that stayed together for the life of my children. And so I sat down and I took the time to cry about all those things, not just losing him, but losing my kids having their father to grow up to, the family, the extended family, for him to be able to walk them down the aisle, because no one can ever take that place, even if there's somebody willing to do that. And so taking the time to grieve and realize that there's more than just the loss of someone's life. There's pain that stems from that loss. And there's a lot of pain for all of those things that come from that. And so taking the time for me to sit and actually think through some of those, even 2 years after losing him, was really big for me, because I needed to sit there and think, oh, it's not just that I lost my best friend, it's that I lost the father of my children, and I lost this, and I lost this, and to be able to say it's okay to grieve all those things, and some of those things will be easier to come to terms with than others. And I think that knowing that that grief is a process is also important to grieving well, because if you grieve well, you know that grief doesn't end. There isn't a line where you say, okay, I'm better now. So to grieve well, you have to know that there's still going to be times when you're going back and forth from one side to the other, and that's okay.
I think it's really important to make mention of the fact that I think sometimes we think, I don't have time for that right now, or I don't want to feel that right now. But as a neuropsychologist, I can say that it's better to allow yourself to feel it, because otherwise it will come out some other time, and not when you expect it,
not when you need it to. Yep. I would agree with that. And I have friends who have worried because their kids haven't grieved the loss of losing a parent, and they fear for when it will come out, because it will eventually, that grief will catch up with you. And you have to do that process in order to be healthy. And if you don't, you're going to struggle with something. It will, like you said, it's going to come out sometime, and it's probably not going to be when you want it to.
That's right. That's right. Friends, we're going to take a real quick 1-minute commercial break, but stick with us, because after the break, Tricia's going to share her hope-filled perspective. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your hope-filled perspective. Tricia, I've lost a lot of people in my life, but I've never lost a spouse. And on this program, I not only want to support the person who is struggling in the grief, but I want to equip our listeners to know how to help. What advice can you give us for ways that we can step in and be helpful to someone who's in the midst of grief right now?
I would love to answer that question. Like I said before, sometimes it's as simple as something that doesn't cost you anything, picking up the phone and calling, or texting, or sending them a card in the mail and letting them know you're thinking about them and that their loss is not forgotten. And if you have the means, sending them a meal or asking what they need done, because one of the hardest things for me has been knowing that I had to learn to do a lot of things that I didn't want to learn to do. Learning to do lawn care and taking care of my house. And I ran out of heat twice in Ohio in the winter because I didn't know I was supposed to call and have them refill the gas. And those are all things I was capable of doing, but I didn't want to do. So having somebody else there to say, hey, let us help you with this. Let me remind you of some of the things that you can do. Right after I lost Ben, one of his military friends sent me a list of everything that I needed to do. And he said, these are the things that you should put on your list to accomplish. And here's the time frame for when you should try to do these things. And I wouldn't have known to do any of those things. So I appreciated somebody saying, hey, Tricia, this is what you need to do. And having other people who are like, let me go help you look through like papers in his office and find the things that you need, because I know you don't want to do that by yourself. So even being there for me while I'm doing those things, even if you can't help, being there to sit and grieve with them. I think the other thing that sometimes people don't realize when they try to help is that it's okay to say nothing. And so you don't have to have answers for what it is. Sometimes just sitting there and saying, I'm here and I hear what you're saying. And if you want to talk, I can listen. But you don't have to tell us how to fix the pain. because you can't. And it's okay. We don't expect you to. We just want to know that someone hears us and understands and is willing to listen and take all of that in.
You know, you mentioned that God had you going through Job in preparation. And I think about the story of Job so often because his friends meant well and they did great when they sat there in silence. It was only when they tried to fix the problem and tell Job what, you know, why he was having those problems and what he should do about it, that they got themselves in trouble. And I would think that the person who's grieving, they just want you to be present.
Mm-hmm. They do.
You cannot fix it.
And they feel so alone already, because for people who have lost a spouse especially, they have had somebody to go ask questions about everything. And so they've had that words of affirmation, the person who affirms them in everything that they do, and that support person is gone. So they don't want to make decisions. And if they do make decisions and people say, hey, maybe you should do this or you should do this, they're not sure if they're making the wrong decision. And they don't know who to ask because they don't have that person anymore. So everything that might have been just a small decision suddenly becomes such a bigger thing. And they want to know that people support them and that they're listening without necessarily saying, well, what you're doing isn't right. And that's where Job's friends they wanted to fix his problems for him and say, oh, you should have done this, or you did this. And he really just needed somebody to say, okay, we're here for you. What do you need?
Yes. If a listener is struggling right now with finding joy, what hope-filled perspective would you want to offer them?
I would recommend starting a gratitude journal and looking for the good, even if it's one thing a day. And I think sometimes doing it at the end of the day is a good time to do it, or if you're really struggling. For me, I found that first 6 months after losing Ben, spending time reading my Bible and in the scripture in all the quiet times made me feel closer to God than I had ever felt, because he's all I had. And I think that sometimes, I think that's what helped me to grieve well and to come out choosing joy on the other side of that grieving hard, because I also knew that there was somebody there for me. I was not alone. And that, I think, it gave me a lot of hope. It gave me a lot of faith and trust. I think that's hard sometimes because people want something tangible to give them hope. They want somebody who sits right there with them. And so I encourage the others, the friends, to be there and try to give that hope to somebody who's grieving or who's facing a loss or something hard in life, because I feel like that we can give those people hope. We can give those people who are struggling hope, and they need somebody to do that for them.
How about with our children? How do we intentionally teach our children to find joy in the everyday?
We work hard on that one around here. We struggle with lots of meltdowns because we're 6 and 8, but they know, and before they could even really read, they knew the word joy. And we would walk through stores and they'd be like, Mommy, that says joy, that says joy. Aww. And there's signs all around my house that say choose joy, because I needed those reminders. They were across from the kitchen. They were where I bathed the kids, because that was Ben's job. And I didn't want to do that job. And so they would see that and they would be like, oh yeah, we're supposed to choose joy. What's that mean again? And so we talk about that even when we have hard moments and we're struggling or we're arguing with each other. And I'm like, we can make something good out of this. Let's look for the good. Where's the good? So when things like school get canceled for 3 weeks or longer, we look for the good. We're like, we can wear our pajamas. we can eat breakfast late. We don't have to start school at 7:30. We can start at 10. Let's see, what are all the good things that could come from this? And we get to play. We can finish school in 2 hours and go do something fun. So looking for what is good in something that wouldn't necessarily think of as good, and trying to flip the perspective, trying to make them see what is the positives that came from this, even though it seems like really negative.
I love it. Listeners, I want to leave you with 2 scripture verses today. The first is Proverbs 31:25, and it says, "She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come." In intentionally choosing joy, we can look in the future with laughter on our tongues. And the second verse is 2 Timothy 4:7 that says, "I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, and I have kept the faith." And to a very large extent, that's what it takes to be able to find joy in the midst of our pain. It's having faith that God is still good, that God is still trustworthy, and that it's okay, even when things are difficult, to look for the joy in life. Tricia, I'm so grateful that you were here with us today and that you shared your story. I'm so proud of you, and I'm proud of how you're raising your kids. That is a legacy that Ben would be so proud of. And I just honor him and that attitude that he had that helped set the tone for the family. Friends, this has been another episode of Your Hope-Filled Perspective. As always, until next week, make it a hope-filled week.